In February 2005, a quiet neighborhood in Fort Worth, Texas, became the backdrop for a tragedy that would leave 3 lives erased and a community forever shaken. Lisa Underwood, a 34-year-old mother, was 7 months pregnant and focused on building a future for her young son, Jayden, just 7 years old. She trusted someone she knew, a man she believed cared for her. Dale Barbee, a married truck driver living a double life, had been secretly involved with Lisa and feared his lies were about to be exposed. What happened next was devastating. Inside Lisa's home, prosecutors say Barbee suffocated both Lisa and Jayden, then buried their bodies in a shallow grave miles away, hoping they would never be found. When police questioned him, Barbee confessed, then later took it back, claiming coercion and insisting on his innocence for years. DNA would later reveal he wasn't even the father of the unborn child, a discovery that raised haunting questions about motive, truth, and irreversible punishment. After a controversial trial, decades on death row, and a series of last-minute legal battles, Dale Barbee would walk into the execution chamber at Huntsville State Penitentiary in November 2022. He declined a last meal, and when given a chance to address the world one final time, he offered words of peace, but never spoke the names of his victims. To understand how a hidden affair ended in a triple loss of life, how justice unfolded over 17 years, and how one man faced death with unresolved questions still hanging in the air, we have to go back to the beginning. But first, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is not just a story about an execution. It's a story about trust, betrayal, and lives that never got a second chance. Between 2005 and 2007, life for Lisa Underwood revolved around quiet routines and simple hopes in Fort Worth, Texas, where the 34-year-old mother was known by family and friends as a hard-working, deeply caring woman who put her child's needs above her own. Lisa was employed, independent, and fiercely protective of her son, navigating daily responsibilities while preparing for the arrival of a new baby she believed would complete her family. At 7 months pregnant, she was already imagining names, birthdays, and the future milestones she hoped to witness. First steps, first words, first days of school, unaware that her life was moving toward a sudden and irreversible end. In family photographs and memories, Lisa appears warm and attentive, the kind of mother who listened closely, planned carefully, and tried to create stability even when life was uncertain. Her son, Jayden, was just 7 years old, an energetic and trusting child who loved school, cartoons, and spending time with the people he depended on most. Those who knew him described a boy full of curiosity, laughter, and the innocent confidence that comes from believing adults will always keep you safe. Jayden's world was small but meaningful: classrooms, playgrounds, bedtime routines, and at the center of it all was his mother, the person he trusted without question. In the end, Jayden relied on the adults around him to protect his life, to shield him from harm, and to ensure his future. Instead, his childhood was cut short, his voice was silenced, and his life ended in a way no child should ever experience, leaving behind a grief that words can barely contain. Before his name became associated with one of Fort Worth's most disturbing crimes, Dale Barbee lived a life that, on the surface, appeared unremarkable and stable. He was a married man, employed as a truck driver, spending long hours on the road and presenting himself as quiet, reliable, and emotionally controlled to those around him. Friends and acquaintances described Barbee as soft-spoken and outwardly calm, a man who rarely drew attention to himself and seemed to blend easily into everyday life. But behind that carefully maintained image, Barbee was living a double life, balancing his marriage on one side and a secret relationship on the other, a contradiction that would slowly tighten into unbearable pressure. That hidden relationship was with Lisa Underwood, a woman who believed Barbee was not only emotionally invested in her, but also the father of her unborn child. As Lisa's pregnancy progressed, so did the emotional and practical stakes. Prosecutors would later argue that Barbee feared the collapse of the life he had built, the exposure of his affair, the consequences within his marriage, and the public unraveling of his carefully controlled identity. Each passing day brought the risk that the truth would surface, and with it, irreversible consequences. To the outside world, Stephen Barbee appeared ordinary, steady, and unthreatening. But beneath that surface, pressure was building, a pressure that prosecutors say would ultimately explode in devastating violence. In February 2005, the routines that defined Lisa Underwood's life suddenly and inexplicably came to a halt, marking the beginning of a disappearance that would quickly alarm everyone who knew her. Phone calls went unanswered, text messages received no replies, and scheduled appointments, commitments Lisa was known to take seriously, were quietly missed one by one. As hours stretched into days, concern turned into fear. Lisa was not the type to vanish without explanation, especially not with her 7-year-old son, Jayden, by her side and a pregnancy nearing its final months. Family members replayed their last conversations, checking calendars, leaving voicemail messages that rang endlessly with no response. Each unanswered call and crossed-off date became more unsettling than the last. The silence surrounding Lisa and Jayden felt wrong, unnatural, and deeply ominous. As worry escalated, loved ones contacted authorities, and what began as concerns soon shifted into a formal investigation. Police reports were filed, timelines assembled, and officers began asking the same haunting questions. Where could a pregnant mother and her young child have gone, and why had they left behind every part of their normal routine? Homes stood quiet, phones continued to ring unanswered, and the absence grew louder with every passing hour. Investigators understood what Lisa's family already knew in their hearts. Mothers don't vanish voluntarily, and children don't disappear without warning. Whatever had happened to Lisa and Jayden, it was not a choice, and it was not an accident. As the investigation intensified, detectives began focusing their attention on Stephen Dale Barbee, whose connection to Lisa Underwood placed him squarely at the center of the growing mystery. Inside a police interrogation room, under hours of questioning, Barbee's calm exterior began to fracture. Eventually, he did what investigators had been waiting for. He confessed. According to police records, Barbee told detectives that he had killed Lisa and her 7-year-old son, Jayden, describing how their lives were taken inside the home where they should have been safest. He then agreed to show authorities where the bodies were hidden, leading them to a remote wooded area in Denton County, where investigators uncovered a shallow grave containing the remains of a pregnant mother and her child. For law enforcement, the case appeared to be solved in its most tragic form. Stephen Barbee told police he had done the unthinkable, and the discovery of the bodies seemed to confirm the nightmare everyone feared. But the story did not end there. In the days and years that followed, Barbee recanted his confession, insisting that it had been coerced through psychological pressure and exhaustion during interrogation. He claimed he had been manipulated into saying things that were not true and maintained that he was innocent of the murders. Despite the confession, the physical evidence, and the recovery of the bodies, Barbee would spend years asserting that the truth had been distorted in the interrogation room. This reversal would become a central pillar of his defense, fueling appeals and legal arguments for nearly 2 decades. What once seemed like a closed case now carried an enduring shadow of doubt, raising troubling questions about confession reliability, investigative pressure, and whether the full truth had truly been spoken. In 2006, Stephen Dale Barbee was brought into a Texas courtroom to stand trial for capital murder, facing the gravest charge the state could bring for the deaths of Lisa Underwood, her 7-year-old son Jayden, and her unborn child. Prosecutors laid out a case built on motive and consequence, arguing that Barbee's actions were driven by an overwhelming fear of exposure, fear that his secret affair would be revealed, that his marriage would collapse, and that the carefully constructed life he had maintained would unravel beyond repair. They told jurors that as the pressure mounted, Barbee chose a path of irreversible violence rather than face the truth. The courtroom grew tense as evidence was presented, including his confession and the recovery of the bodies, painting a picture of betrayal followed by calculated brutality. But it was the defense strategy that stunned observers and would later become one of the most controversial aspects of the case. Despite Barbee's insistence that he was innocent, His own attorneys conceded guilt during the trial, a move that left the courtroom in shock and would later fuel years of appeals. Barbee would argue that this admission violated his constitutional rights, claiming his lawyers had taken away his ability to maintain his innocence before the jury. Still, the trial pressed forward. After closing arguments, the jury withdrew to deliberate. The weight of 3 lost lives hung heavy in the room. The jury deliberated. The verdict was swift. Stephen Dale Barbee was found guilty of capital murder, and soon after, the sentence was pronounced: death. With those words, his fate was sealed, and the case shifted from the search for truth to a long and final wait for execution. For the next 17 years, Stephen Dale Barbee lived in the confines of Texas death row, a place defined by strict routines, stark cells, and the constant awareness of the impending execution that hung over every day, where hours were measured in monotony and the absence of freedom pressed heavily on the mind and body. During this time, his health steadily deteriorated, with severe joint disease making even simple movements painful, and the long isolation taking a psychological toll that compounded the physical strain of life behind bars. Throughout his years awaiting death, Barbee's legal team pursued a series of appeals and lawsuits, challenging aspects of his conviction and execution, including claims under the Sixth Amendment that his trial counsel had violated his rights, religious freedom arguments concerning the presence and participation of spiritual advisors during his execution, and disability accommodation requests highlighting the difficulties his failing health posed to the process of lethal injection. Each appeal, each legal argument, each court decision extended the waiting, but never changed the inevitable. And so, day after day, year after year, for 17 years, Stephen Barbee waited, knowing how it would end, living under the shadow of death, and facing the slow, relentless passage of time that marked both punishment and anticipation. In the final days leading up to his execution, Stephen Dale Barbee faced the reality that nearly 2 decades on death row were coming to an irreversible conclusion as the state of Texas scheduled him for lethal injection on November 16, 2022, at Huntsville State Penitentiary, a facility long associated with the administration of the ultimate punishment. In keeping with prison tradition, inmates are offered a last meal of their choosing, a final gesture of humanity before death. But Barbee declined a special meal, requesting instead to forego the ritual entirely. This simple refusal carried a quiet weight, reflecting either resignation, defiance, or a desire for control in the only choice left to him. As he prepared for what would be his final hours, the walls of the penitentiary, the sterile execution chamber, and the routines of confinement closed in one last time. Some choose comfort, some choose nothing at all, and in that decision, Barbee left behind a statement of detachment, leaving the world to grapple with the consequences of his actions while he confronted his own mortality in silence. Inside the execution chamber at Huntsville State Penitentiary, the final moments of Stephen Dale Barbee's life unfolded under the watchful eyes of prison officials, witnesses, and the weight of years of legal proceedings that had led to this point. The process did not begin smoothly. Due to Barbee's severe joint disease and deteriorating physical condition, medical staff experienced delays while attempting to locate viable veins, a complication that prolonged the already tense atmosphere inside the chamber and underscored the physical toll his years on death row had taken. Eventually, after multiple attempts, intravenous lines were successfully placed and the execution moved forward. When given the opportunity to speak, Barbee delivered his final words, recorded officially by the state: "I just want everyone to have peace in their heart. I'm ready." Notably, he made no mention of Lisa Underwood, Jayden, or the unborn child, leaving some witnesses struck by the absence of acknowledgement or apology in his final statement. As the lethal injection was administered, the chamber fell silent, marked only by the steady passage of time. At 7:35 p.m., Stephen Dale Barbee was pronounced dead. Outside, prison gates closed, a clock ticked forward, and a candle faded into darkness, signaling the end of a life and the final chapter of a case that had begun with 3 innocent victims whose futures were taken long before this moment. As the story of Stephen Dale Barbee comes to its close, The focus shifts from the man who faced execution to the lives that were tragically taken. Lisa Underwood, her 7-year-old son Jayden, and the unborn child whose futures were stolen in a single devastating act, leaving behind a grief that no trial, no sentence, and no passage of time could ever fully heal. Against the flickering glow of a candlelight memorial, and with the Crime Report Network logo softly appearing on screen, viewers are reminded that this was not merely the account of a man who died under the authority of the state, but of a mother and a child who never got the chance to live, whose absence continues to reverberate through family, friends, and the community. And as the screen fades toward black, a call to reflection and engagement emerges. Was justice served? Or does this case raise deeper questions about truth, punishment, and finality? The audience is invited to grapple with these moral and legal complexities, to share their perspectives, and to leave their thoughts in the comments, ensuring that the memory of those lost and the questions their deaths provoke are not quietly forgotten.